Let's talk about some of this week's big political stories with my first guest, Ruth Hannan, who's based in Manchester and is a director of the People's Powerhouse. That's a movement that aims to bring Northerners together to have a say on what the future of the North should be. Ruth, it's your first time on the podcast, so welcome along. How are you?
It is my first time. Thank you so much for having me, Rob. I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Well, it's lovely. It's lovely to have you on, and it's very timely as well because we this week you kindly wrote for us a thought-provoking, I think, opinion piece for the Northern Agenda newsletter, basically responding to an op-ed that we ran last week from Lord Jim O'Neill. So, for people who don't know who that is, he is the chair of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, which is a sort of business-led lobbying group and one of the main thinkers behind the Northern Powerhouse concept, along with George Osborne, the former Chancellor. Now, Lord O'Neill's piece was about how he believes a productive, prosperous north of England could be built through things like innovation-led growth, skills, and infrastructure, all the things that we talk about quite a lot on this podcast. But Ruth, your piece set out quite a different vision, I think, for Northern England and I guess the type of North that we want to create. Can you just sort of take us through the main points?
Yeah, certainly. I think, I mean, first of all, I would say that I think my father would have been very proud that I essentially picked a fight with a lord. So yeah, that's an unusual one for me. But yeah, I think the reason I asked if we could respond was that what Lord O'Neill was saying didn't feel that new. It felt just like a different version of what we've had in the North before, that industry, big business in one way or another can save us. And I, I think I started my piece as, we're filled with former mining towns, former shipbuilding towns, having being born in one and lived there as a child in Selby in Yorkshire. And I feel like what that often leads to is people not having a say in those decisions and having to go along with decisions that might not be being made in Westminster but still feel far away from them. And in the 21st century, with the challenges that we see now with people who are working, and we have stories all the time about nurses who have to use food banks, and people earn good money, but they can't afford to live well. And I think sort of saying, bringing different business to the North, which will bring wages, just isn't a complex enough solution to the challenges that we face in the 21st century. And that includes those who can't work, those who are working as hard as they can and still aren't living a good life, but not even taking into account things like the climate crisis. What does that mean for the North? So I think for me, I feel like we could have a much bolder conversation about what the North could be. We have great work being done by organisations like Clares and places like Preston on how you could build a community wealth building model for a whole place. And we've, there are other people, Jamie Driscoll in the north of Tyne is a proponent of community wealth building. Scotland has kind of set out a very bold vision of both community wealth building and a well-being economy. And I feel like that's the sort of conversation we should start to talk to people in the North about. What does living a good life mean that isn't just about a wage from a hopeful big industry? Because as we've seen, that model has been pushed before and all of those are gone. West Yorkshire and parts of Lancashire decimated by the loss of collieries. The North Sea coast where we had fishing industries, where we had shipbuilding, all gone now. And the ripple effect into those towns lasts decades. And in bringing in new business won't turn that around for a really long time. So I feel like it's time for a different conversation that isn't led by big business, because they don't even represent all of business. That's a big challenge. Northern Powerhouse speaks for big business, not even small and medium, which most people work in.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the points that you're making sort of get right to the heart of a lot of the political debate that there's been about the North, don't they? In terms of how do we make the North more prosperous for everyone? And you
Yeah.
can see it in places like Teesside, where there's the whole debate about uh, getting all these companies investing in Teesside, where there's really high poverty
Yeah.
rates and high crime rates, and
Yes.
who benefits from that. And I guess the point that I would imagine that Lord O'Neill and people who are in favour of the sort of business-led approach, what they might say is that in order to get the things that you're talking about, you need to have that wealth coming into communities in the first place. Like, it's very hard to build a good life for people in regions that are very poor because there just aren't the resources there to sustain it. And so you have to, like, the investment and the business and the jobs that they create, that has to be the starting point before you build anything else. But what you're saying is, I guess, flipping it on its head and saying it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, but I think also as well, it's really scrutinizing that, that argument of we need to bring wealth in to make a place better. And what the community wealth building model talks about a lot is, yeah, but where does that money go when it comes into a place? Does it stay in that place, or does it go straight back out again? I live right next to Manchester United, a huge business. And has that benefited the local community, having that huge business here? I think there's a lot of work to be done at looking at where those benefits lie, what the impact of those businesses are, what good. I kind of often think about, and it's often the difference between small businesses and big is, are they a part of a community? Are they invested in that community doing well? Or are they just using that as a place to make a profit? A lot of places in the north now are reliant on big depots being built, where people often have precarious contracts, low pay, um, and that business might do well, but the money doesn't necessarily stay in that community. And with that, and then I suppose it's that kind of, you can put a seed in the ground, but unless you tend to that seed, you're not going to have a plant that flourishes. And I think I kind of see like business as a bit of a seed. You can plant that seed, but unless you then nurture how that community can develop, and how that prosperity can spread, it 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 doesn't. I suppose for me, it feels like the turn of the same wheel, and it feels like that wheel needs to change direction.
That's really interesting. Now, you mentioned in your piece, as an example of a project that's looking at doing things differently, universal basic income, which not everyone, I guess, will know what that is, but essentially, it's the idea that people will be given a certain amount of
Yeah,
money, in this case, £1,600 a month, by the state, no strings attached, to spend as they wish. And actually, it's happening. It's been tried in a few different places, but it's being tried specifically now in Jarrow, a town south of the River Tyne in the northeast. There's a select group of residents will get this money for a few months to see how it impacts on their physical and mental health, and I guess just what the impact of it is. And I mean, I think universal basic income is sort of an article of faith for a lot of people, that this, or for some people, that this is the big idea that hasn't been tried yet. I mean, do you think what's your view on it? Do you think it could work?
I think we have to try, because what we have now has failed so many people. Our benefit system, our social security, to use its original term, our social security was there to provide us with security if something went wrong in our lives, whether that be illness, whether that be disability, whether that be a loss of job. And we see all around us that doesn't work. We see through the high levels of homelessness, we see through the fact that people can't survive on what is currently provided. And it feels like then we need to approach it in a different way. We have a convention every year, and last year we had two different poverty truth commissions come and speak, Morecambe and Trafford, and it was really powerful to hear the impact poverty has on people's lives, but also the complex reasons why they're in poverty. And trialing out something like universal basic income, where it has been tried, and I think the biggest trial that's taking place at the moment is across Africa, and it's going to be a 10-year program, which is really enormous. But the difference it can make on people's lives, I think that focusing on being well, we don't think about how expensive it is for us to be unwell, not just for us as individuals, but for our society. It costs, smoking cessation is expensive. People smoking and becoming unwell from smoking is really bad for their health and costs us all huge amounts of money, which is why we try and get people to stop smoking. But we don't apply the same approach to other health inequalities and people living in poverty. Being in poverty is expensive for everybody. So something like a universal basic income, the impact that could have on not just those individuals who receive it, but again, the community around them, I just think can be really profound. So I think trialing it and spreading the word, and so people know what it is and they understand it. I think somebody was saying on Twitter about it's often talked about as money for nothing, as opposed to money for anything. And I think I like that kind of thing, like what opportunities could it provide people if they were given this opportunity? So yeah, I think we have a lot of organisations working on universal basic income across the North, and I think it's a good thing to spread the word more on it so that we all understand what it is and what difference it could make.
Yeah, I saw a tweet from an MP called Brendan Clark-Smith, who is the Conservative MP for Bassetlaw in North Nottinghamshire, which I suspect might reflect some people's view on universal basic income, which is they, i.e. the people who run this, will be surprised to hear there's a system already in place regarding income, which is widely referred to as employment. This is an absolutely dreadful idea, and I think the people behind this initiative will struggle to raise the funds necessary. I mean, I guess that reflects some people's view on this, which is that if you give people money with no strings attached, it might be a disincentive to finding work. Obviously, to put it in rather undiplomatic terms. I mean, presumably we won't know whether that is the case or not until we've done more studies on how this works or doesn't work.
I mean, the ones that have been done, I mean, I'm just going to refer back to that MP, and I'm going to say I don't want to shock him, but the example he's given of employment isn't working either. We have people who have precarious contracts. We have people who get paid. If you just look at people like delivery drivers, couriers, they don't even get the equivalent of the living wage. And, so employment isn't working for us. So to go hark back to some kind of idyllic land in the 1950s where everybody worked 35 hours a week, had very well protected contracts, got double time, the heady days of double time when you worked overtime, they don't exist anymore now. So employment isn't working for people. And this idea that, giving people money makes them lazier, the evidence that has come out of the trials is the opposite of that, really.
Well, let's rattle through a few of the other stories in the North. So you mentioned Jamie Driscoll earlier, the North of Tyne mayor. So people haven't heard this story. He is hoping to be the first Metro mayor of the North East when that role is elected next year, but it seems unlikely he will be able to do so as a Labour politician because the Labour ruling ruling body, have not included him in the shortlist to be Labour's candidate. And it comes down to, it would appear, Jamie Driscoll's decision to appear alongside Ken Loach, the filmmaker, who has also been who's been kicked out of Labour. He appeared alongside him earlier this year, and as a result of that, the Labour Party have taken the view that he is not a suitable person to represent them as a potential candidate to be the North East mayor. Now, I know you don't particularly want to get into the sort of party politics of this, but in terms of what it tells us about the relationship, I guess, between the big national institutions and our local leaders, I mean, it's got to be a bit of a concern, hasn't it, that a democratically elected metro mayor in one part of the North East is being barred, not from standing as mayor at all, but standing for mayor in his own party by people who aren't sort of connected to that community. That's the sort of concern that leaps out to me.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the kind of problem with our wider political system of kind of a lack of transparency, a lack of kind of democracy, even really. As you say, this is a sitting mayor in the northeast of England, who a very small group of people have decided it isn't even being allowed to be chosen by the people of the northeast, and I think that's the thing that speaks to me, is that it just shows the problems with our wider model of democracy, which is small numbers of people choose and make decisions about places that they're not connected to. I mean, I think Jamie is talking about standing as an independent. But that speaks to the kind of wider challenges about how do people vote and how do people understand and have access to the information they need about making good decisions when they vote. And I suppose for me, it is that issue around our democratic system just needs overhauling completely. Because even though we have democratically elected mayors in the devolved areas of the north, how we even have a say in the decisions that they make is incredibly limited. Our power as citizens of the north is pretty much restricted to putting an X in a box once every 4 years and asked to consult on issues rather than be active participants in deciding things. So I think for me it is that the northeast residents, if he wasn't doing a good job for the northeast, those people should have the chance to decide that.
I mean, I guess the option available to him, I suppose, is to run as an independent or another party, which would mean he would be on the ballot paper and people could vote for him. But I guess that has its own disadvantages. Now, another story that caught my eye, which we've run a lot in the Northern Agenda, is about about asylum seekers and about the latest government proposals, which is that they want to save money on housing asylum seekers in hotels, which is exorbitantly expensive, and they want to house many of them in barges, which is a plan that has prompted a lot of uproar and anger, particularly in Merseyside and Teesside, because those are reportedly the places where the first two of these barges are being procured by the government. I think they're going to potentially could hold more than 1,000 asylum seekers each, and it's prompted a big backlash, even from local Conservative MPs like Jacob Young in Teesside. I mean, I guess the overarching problem is that there's this huge backlog of asylum seekers to be processed. There's more people fleeing war and persecution and torture in other countries and coming here than there used to be, even though we don't get perhaps as many as other countries do. And the system is buckling under that strain. And so there's not many good options, are there? But I mean, this, would you agree with the critics of this plan that this is not the way forward?
I mean, I think for me is to try and always imagine what it would be like in those people's shoes. how I would feel if I were fleeing persecution in the country that I was born, and to be told, we're going to chuck you on a boat in the middle of, and you won't have access to outdoor space. And, when you think you're going to somewhere that is a safe and welcoming place, I feel for me, it's how do we want to be? What do we want our legacy to be as British people, but as Northerners? And for me, that would be to be welcoming and compassionate. And for me, this feels like an uncomfortable, quick fix to a broken system. And the people who are going to suffer the most are the people who are already having experienced massive suffering. We had an event in April looking at housing and racial justice, and we had a wonderful woman called Wan Abdullah, who is in West Yorkshire, and speak. She's an asylum seeker, and talked about the trauma of that process, but also the trauma of kind of being stateless and being homeless, and the terrible conditions that people are put in. I mean, when we say hotel, I think everybody thinks we're talking about the Ritz-Carlton, and it's far from that. For me, if you've got a system that isn't working, it is on you to make that system work better, not to punish people who are already phenomenally traumatized. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel like it. If I feel ashamed, which this makes me feel, then we shouldn't be doing it. That's my instinct.
Interesting. Now, let's finish off with something a little bit lighter, although I guess it's something that still riles a few people up. There was a few weeks ago, there was a delightful, heartwarming images from the Rob Borough Marathon in Leeds. Kevin Sinfield is a famous rugby league player, a big fundraiser for motor neurone disease, which Rob Borough has. He did this marathon. He was pushing his friend Rob Borough all the way to the finishing line. He picked him up and carried him over the finishing line. He's raised millions of pounds for charity, and lots of people are saying he should be knighted, should become Sir Kevin Sinfield for what he's done. But the problem is, he was only last year made an OBE, and so stuffy Whitehall rules, as described in the Daily Mirror, prevent him from being made a Sir in the near future. He's going to have to wait a few years, and it's been suggested in the Mirror that this is actually a levelling up issue. It's an issue that pertains to regional inequality, because lots of rugby union players based primarily in the south end up getting honours, whereas big, well-known rugby league players, which is played mostly in the north, are less likely to. I don't know if that's the case or not, but there is a story that was in the Times a couple of weeks ago, which is that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, is concerned about the number of honours in the honour system that go to the different regions. And it's been pointed out that the northeast and northwest of England are less well represented in the honours list than their population size would suggest, and London is represented much more. So the honours system needs levelling up. Does this matter? Does it matter if people are more likely to get a knighthood or an OBE if they live in London than if they live in Leeds or Oldham? Is that a big issue, do you think?
I mean, I mean, first of all, I think what Kevin Sinfield's done has been amazing. Although I can't speak to the league or union, much to the horror of my family that lives in West Yorkshire, I don't really care about rugby or know the difference between the two. I think it speaks more to, is this the best we've got? Is this, I mean, has anybody asked Kevin whether he's bothered about being a knight? I'm sure that's not what he set out to do, or what his motivation was. And I think, I suppose in a way for me, it speaks to that kind of model of how do we recognise the things that people do that are great? And we already know that the honours system is fairly broken and messy when we look at who gets honours and who doesn't. And having actually nominated for someone for it's a very laborious and weird process.
Were you successful
We
in
were,
your nomination?
and it felt very strange as somebody who doesn't really support that system, but felt like the only way we could have that person recognised for the work that they'd done as a volunteer. But it took us about 4 years for that to get all the way through and over the finish line. I mean, if that's the case, and it's going to be the system that we always have, it should be fairer. But is this the best system we've got for recognising when people do great things? Probably not. I don't think. I think we should, because there'll be because obviously the thing it depends on is somebody taking the time to nominate you, and I bet there's tons of people quietly going about their lives doing awesome things on a daily basis, and they'll never get an OBE or a knighthood. So maybe we should just give them to everybody and then it'll be fair. It's like a universal basic income for knighthoods.
1 in every 10 people just gets a knighthood, just
let's
randomly
give that
assigned.
A go.
Yeah, couldn't be any worse than the current system, could it?
It's as arbitrary, arguably.
You could say that. Well, that is a good note to end on. That's a contentious point. People have views on. Ruth, thank you so much for speaking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob.